Hello, forever friends and family. Welcome to webinar Jonathan Seagull. The book is written by Richard Bach. My name is Alex Tunitsky and I am presenter of this webinar. Today is May 5th, 2025, first Monday of May. Time is flying. So let me go to appropriate page just to start to reading. We will have a reader, professional reader, audio, and we will combine together. We will watch the text of the book and start and continue to read. Hold on for a minute, please. That's the best technique to do that, to watch the text and to listen audio. You can see the text, right, Zoe?
Yes.
Okay, let me turn on the audio for a second. Hold on, please.
Thorson's Audio presents Jonathan Livingston Seagull, written and read by Richard Bach.
It was morning, and the new sun sparkled gold across the ripples of a gentle sea. A mile from shore, a fishing boat chummed the water, and the word for breakfast flock flashed through the air till a crowd of 1,000 seagulls came to dodge and fight for bits of food. It was another busy day beginning. But way off alone, out by himself beyond boat and shore, Jonathan Livingston Seagull was practicing. 100 feet in the sky, he lowered his webbed feet, lifted his beak, and strained to hold a painful, hard, twisting curve through his wings. The curve meant that he would fly slowly, and now he slowed until the wind was a whisper in his face, until the ocean stood still beneath him. He narrowed his eyes in fierce concentration, held his breath, forced one single more inch of curve. Then his feathers ruffled, he stalled, and fell. Seagulls, as you know, never falter, never stall. To stall in the air is for them disgrace, and it is dishonor. But Jonathan Livingston Seagull, unashamed, stretching his wings again in that trembling, hard curve, slowing, and stalling once more, was no ordinary bird. Most gulls don't bother to learn more than the simplest facts of flight, how to get from shore to food and back again. For most gulls, it is not flying that matters, but eating. For this gull, though, it was not eating that mattered, but flight. More than anything else, Jonathan Livingston Seagull loved to fly. This kind of thinking, he found, is not the way to make oneself popular with other birds. Even his parents were dismayed, as Jonathan spent whole days alone, making hundreds of low-level glides, experimenting. He didn't know why, for instance, but when he flew at altitudes less than half his wingspan above the water, he could stay in the air longer, with less effort. His glides ended not with the usual feet-down splash into the sea, but with a long, flat wake as he touched the surface with his feet tightly streamlined against his body. When he began sliding into feet-up landings on the beach, then pacing the length of his slide in the sand, his parents were very much dismayed indeed. "Why, John, why?" his mother asked. "Why is it so hard to be like the rest of the flock, John? Why can't you leave low-flying to the pelicans, the albatross? Why don't you eat? Son, you're bone and feathers." "I don't mind being bone and feathers, Mom. I just want to know what I can do in the air and what I can't, that's all. I just want to know." "See here, Jonathan," said his father, not unkindly. "Winter isn't far away. Boats will be few, and the surface fish will be swimming deep. If you must study, then study food and how to get it. This flying business is all very well, but you can't eat a glide, you know. Don't you forget that the reason you fly is to eat." Jonathan nodded obediently. For the next few days he tried to behave like the other gulls. He really tried, screeching and fighting with the flock around the piers and fishing boats, diving on scraps of fish and bread. But he couldn't make it work. "It's all so pointless," he thought, deliberately dropping a hard-won anchovy to a hungry old gull chasing him. "I could be spending all this time learning to fly. There's so much to learn." It wasn't long before Jonathan Gull was off by himself again, far out at sea, hungry, happy, learning. The subject was speed, and in a week's practice he learned more about speed than the fastest gull alive. From 1,000 feet, flapping his wings as hard as he could, he pushed over into a blazing steep dive toward the waves, and learned why seagulls don't make blazing steep power dives. In just 6 seconds he was moving 70 miles per hour, the speed at which one's wing goes unstable on the upstroke. Time after time it happened. Careful as he was, working at the very peak of his ability, he lost control at high speed. Climb to 1,000 feet. Full power, straight ahead first, then push over, flapping, to a vertical dive. Then, every time his left wing stalled on an upstroke, he'd roll violently left, stall his right wing recovering, and flick like fire into a wild tumbling spin to the right. He couldn't be careful enough on that upstroke. 10 times he tried, and all 10 times, as he passed through 70 miles per hour, he burst into a churning mass of feathers out of control, crashing down into the water. The key, he thought at last, dripping wet, must be to hold the wings still at high speeds, to flap up to 50 and then hold the wings still. From 2,000 feet he tried again, rolling into his dive, beak straight down, wings full out and stable from the moment he passed 50 miles per hour. It took tremendous strength, but it worked. In 10 seconds he had blurred through 90 miles per hour. Jonathan had set a world speed record for seagulls. But victory was short-lived. The instant he began his pull-out, the instant he changed the angle of his wings, he snapped into that same terrible, uncontrolled disaster, and at 90 miles per hour it hit him like dynamite. Jonathan Seagull exploded in midair and smashed down into a brick-hard sea. When he came to, it was well after dark, and he floated in moonlight on the surface of the ocean. His wings were ragged bars of lead, but the weight of failure was even heavier on his back. He wished, feebly, that the weight could be just enough to drag him gently down to the bottom and end it all. As he sank low in the water, a strange, hollow voice sounded within him. "There's no way around it. I am a seagull. I am limited by my nature. If I were meant to learn so much about flying, I'd have charts for brains. If I were meant to fly at speed, I'd have a falcon's short wings and live on mice instead of fish. My father was right. I must forget this foolishness. I must fly home to the flock and be content as I am, as a poor limited seagull." The voice faded, and Jonathan agreed. The place for a seagull at night is on shore, and from this moment forth, he vowed, he would be a normal gull. It would make everyone happier. He pushed wearily away from the dark water and flew toward the land, grateful for what he had learned about work-saving, low-altitude flying. But no, he thought, I am done with the way I was. I am done with everything I learned. I am a seagull like every other seagull, and I will fly like one. So he climbed painfully to 100 feet and flapped his wings harder, pressing for shore. He felt better for his decision to be just another one of the flock. There would be no ties now to the force that had driven him to learn. There would be no more challenge and no more failure. And it was pretty just to stop thinking and fly through the dark toward the lights above the beach. Dark! The hollow voice cracked in alarm. Seagulls never fly in the dark. Jonathan was not alert to listen. It's pretty, he thought. The moon and the lights twinkling on the water, throwing out little beacon trails through the night, and all so peaceful and still. Get down! Seagulls never fly in the dark. If you were meant to fly in the dark, you'd have the eyes of an owl. You'd have charts for brains. You'd have a falcon's short wings. There in the night, 100 feet in the air, Jonathan Livingston Seagull blinked. His pain, his resolutions vanished. Short wings. A falcon's short wings. That's the answer. What a fool I've been! All I need is a tiny little wing. All I need is to fold most of my wings and fly on just the tips alone. Short wings! He climbed 2,000 feet above the Black Sea, and without a moment for thought of failure and death, he brought his forewings tightly into his body, left only the narrow-swept daggers of his wingtips extended into the wind, and fell into a vertical dive. The wind was a monster roar at his head. 70 miles per hour, 90, 120, and faster still. The wing strain now, at 140 miles per hour, wasn't nearly as hard as it had been before at 70. And with the faintest twist of his wingtips, he eased out of the dive and shot above the waves, a gray cannonball under the moon. He closed his eyes to slits against the wind and rejoiced. 140 miles per hour, and under control! If I dive from 5,000 feet instead of 2,000, I wonder how fast. His vows of a moment before were forgotten, swept away in that great swift wind. Yet he felt guiltless, breaking the promises he had made himself. Such promises are only for the gulls that accept the ordinary. One who has touched excellence in his learning has no need of that kind of promise. By sunup, Jonathan Gull was practicing again. From 5,000 feet, the fishing boats were specks in the flat blue water. Breakfast flock was a faint cloud of dust motes circling. He was alive, trembling ever so slightly with delight, proud that his fear was under control. Then without ceremony he hugged in his forewings, extended his short angled wingtips, and plunged directly toward the sea. By the time he passed 4,000 feet, he had reached terminal velocity. The wind was a solid beating wall of sound against which he could move no faster. He was flying now straight down at 214 miles per hour. He swallowed, knowing that if his wings unfolded at that speed, he'd be blown into 1,000,000 tiny shreds of seagull. But the speed was power, and the speed was joy, and the speed was pure beauty. He began his pull-out at 1,000 feet, wingtips thudding and blurring in that gigantic wind, the boat and the crowd of gulls tilting and growing meteor-fast directly in his path. He couldn't stop. He didn't know yet even how to turn at that speed. Collision would be instant death. And so he shut his eyes. It happened that morning then, just after sunrise, that Jonathan Livingston Seagull fired directly through the center of breakfast flock, ticking off 212 miles per hour, eyes closed, in a great roaring shriek of wind and feathers. The gull of fortune smiled upon him this once, and no one was killed. By the time he had pulled his beak straight up into the sky, he was still scorching along at 160 miles per hour. When he had slowed to 20 and stretched his wings again at last, the boat was a crumb on the sea, 4,000 feet below. His thought was triumph. Terminal velocity, a seagull at 214 miles per hour. It was a breakthrough, the greatest single moment in the history of the flock, and in that moment a new age opened for Jonathan Gull. Flying out to his lonely practice area, folding his wings for a dive from 8,000 feet, he set himself at once to discover how to turn. A single wingtip feather, he found, moved a fraction of an inch, gives a smooth, sweeping curve at tremendous speed. Before he learned this, however, he found that moving more than one feather at that speed will spin you like a rifle ball, and Jonathan had flown the first aerobatics of any seagull on earth. He spared no time that day for talk with other gulls, but flew on past sunset. He discovered the loop, the slow roll, the point roll, the inverted spin, the gull bunt, the pinwheel. When Jonathan Seagull joined the flock on the beach, it was full night. He was dizzy and terribly tired. Yet in delight he flew a loop to landing with a snap roll just before touchdown. When they hear of it, he thought, of the breakthrough, they'll be wild with joy. How much more there is now to living. Instead of our drab slogging forth and back to the fishing boats, there's a reason to life. We can lift ourselves out of ignorance. We can find ourselves as creatures of excellence and intelligence and skill. We can be free. We can learn to fly. The years ahead hummed and glowed with promise. The gulls were flocked into the council gathering when he landed, and apparently had been so flocked for some time. They were, in fact, waiting. Jonathan Livingston Seagull, stand to center. The elder's words sounded in a voice of highest ceremony. Stand to center meant only great shame or great honor. Stand to center for honor was the way the gull's foremost leaders were marked. Of course, he thought, the breakfast flock this morning, they saw the breakthrough. But I want no honors. I have no wish to be leader. I only want to share what I've found, to show those horizons out ahead for us all. He stepped forward. Jonathan Livingston Seagull, said the elder, stand to center for shame in the sight of your fellow gulls. It felt like being hit with a board. His knees went weak, his feathers sagged, there was roaring in his ears. Centered for shame? Impossible! The breakthrough! They can't understand. They're wrong. They're wrong. For his reckless irresponsibility, the solemn voice intoned, violating the dignity and tradition of the gull family. To be centered for shame meant that he would be cast out of gull society, banished to a solitary life on the far cliffs. One day, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, you shall learn that irresponsibility does not pay. Life is the unknown and the unknowable, except that we are put into this world to eat, to stay alive as long as we possibly can. A seagull never speaks back to the council flock, but it was Jonathan's voice raised. Irresponsibility, my brothers, he cried. Who is more responsible than a gull who finds and follows a meaning, a higher purpose for life? For 1,000 years we have scrabbled after fish heads, but now we have a reason to live, to learn, to discover, to be free. Give me one chance. Let me show you what I've found. The flock might as well have been stone. The brotherhood is broken. the gulls intoned together, and with one accord they solemnly closed their ears and turned their backs upon him. Jonathan Seagull spent the rest of his days alone, but he flew way out beyond the far cliffs. His one sorrow was not solitude, it was that other gulls refused to believe the glory of flight that awaited them. They refused to open their eyes and see. He learned more each day. He learned that a streamlined, high-speed dive could bring him to find the rare and tasty fish that schooled 10 feet below the surface of the ocean. He no longer needed fishing boats and stale bread for survival. He learned to sleep in the air, setting a course at night across the offshore wind, covering 100 miles from sunset to sunrise. With the same inner control, he flew through heavy sea fogs and climbed above them into dazzling clear skies, in the very times when every other gull stood on the ground, knowing nothing but mist and rain. He learned to ride the high winds far inland, to dine there on delicate insects. What he had once hoped for the flock, he now gained for himself alone. Learned to fly, and he was not sorry for the price that he had paid. Jonathan Seagull discovered that boredom and fear and anger are the reasons the gull's life is so short, and with these gone from his thought, he lived a long, fine life indeed.
Let's take a break at this moment for this part of the book. It's an outstanding book, pretty famous book for American reader, and we will continue next time, next Monday. But in the meantime, for this webinar, I would like to share one more video strictly about forever business, and I would like to ask Zoya to make a translation of this video, and it will be Eric Worre. Let me switch the screen. It's Eric, right?
Right.
Okay, let's do it. Thank you, Zoya, in advance.
As we're building our business, understanding what the 4 things that we do in building your business are, those 4 things in a network marketing career are: 1, we sell; 2, we recruit; 3, we duplicate; and 4, we lead. Okay, those are the 4 things basically that we do. Today, I want to talk about how we duplicate. How we duplicate. And a lot of times, people miss a very critical point. If you're here and you've got your front line and they have theirs, they have their organizations, various shapes and sizes, okay? Whatever that looks like. And they're saying, most people think duplication is in here.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Пока мы строим наш бизнес, важно понимать 4 основные вещи, которые мы делаем при построении вашего бизнеса. Эти 4 вещи в карьере сетевого маркетинга. Прежде всего, первое – это то, что мы продаем. Второе – мы рекрутируем, то есть нанимаем. Третье – создаем дупликацию. И четвертое – мы лидируем, руководим. Это 4 основные составляющие нашей деятельности. Сегодня я хочу поговорить о дупликации, о том, как мы ее создаем. И часто люди упускают один очень важный момент. Он начинает рисовать. Вот вы, у вас есть первая линия. У них свои люди, свои команды, разных форм и размеров. И большинство думает, что дупликация происходит здесь, в команде. Ну, знаете, где начинается дупликация? Продолжаем.
Here. But guess where duplication starts? Not here. Duplication starts here. You've got to make this circle work before you can make these circles work. You're like, wait a minute. I thought duplication is getting other people to do things. Yes, but what gives you the capacity to get other people to do things? Do things yourself. Because once you do things yourself, you've got the ability to communicate much, much better. You can communicate what to do to others. By your example, you're communicating what to do to others. By your example, you're leading and you're influencing their behavior, whether you communicate it directly or not. But you got to make this circle work. So what does that mean? If you want people to become raving fans of your product, you need to become a raving fan.
Итак, где начинается дупликация? Не здесь, он показывает, дупликация начинается вот здесь, то есть с вас. Вы должны сначала заставить работать этот круг, прежде чем заработают другие. Вы можете подумать, подождите, я думал, дупликация – это когда другие люди что-то делают. Да, но что дает вам способность заставить других что-то делать? Нужно делать самому, потому что как только вы начинаете делать сами, у вас появляется возможность гораздо лучше доносить информацию до других. Своим примером вы показываете, что нужно делать. Своим примером вы влияете на поведение других, даже если не говорите это напрямую. Итак, что это значит? Если вы хотите, чтобы люди были фанатами вашего продукта, вы сами должны стать фанатом. Вы должны стать амбассадором номер один своего продукта или услуги во всем мире. Это и значит заставить свой круг работать.
You need to become the number one ambassador for your product or service around the world. That making this circle work does that. You need to make sales. Well, no, I want my team to make sales. Fine, true. But what's one of the best ways that you can get your team to make sales? Is if you're making sales. Too many people get involved and then they quickly want to say, oh, I want all my team to sell. I don't need to be selling. And if you lose your edge when it comes to sales yourself, you decrease your ability to duplicate. So duplication actually starts with you. You know, when it comes to using the product, when it comes to sales, when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to onboarding, helping people get started effectively, when it comes to attending events, when it comes to personal development, right? You got to do all this stuff before you can expect other people to do this stuff. You've got to do it. So this was hard because there were some things I didn't particularly love to do. And because I didn't love to do those things, I quickly tried to find people on my team that would do the things that I didn't like to do. And I could not figure out, because I'll tell you what my organization looked like. I'll show you. Here's what my organization looked like.
Алло? И остановилось что-то.
Говорите, Зоя.
Окей. Вы хотите, чтобы команда продавала? Хорошо. Но один из лучших способов добиться этого – продавать самому. Слишком многие приходят и сразу говорят: я хочу, чтобы моя команда продавала, мне не нужно продавать. Но если вы теряете навык продаж, вы снижаете способность дупликации. Так что дупликация на самом деле начинается с вас. Это касается адаптации новичков, участия в мероприятиях и личностного роста. Все это вы должны делать сначала сами, прежде чем ожидать этого от других. Мне это тоже было трудно поначалу, потому что были вещи, которые я не особо любил делать. И я пытался найти в команде людей, которые сделают это за меня. И нашел. Но не понимал, почему моя организация выглядела вот так, хаотично. Потому что я приводил людей и говорил: идите делайте, а сам делал только кусочек работы. И в итоге моя организация была перекошенной.
Something like that. This is what my business looked like. Because I was bringing them in and saying, okay, you guys go do it. You guys go do it. Guess what I did? I did this. I did that piece. And I had an organization that looked like this. How do I get duplication? I was so frustrated. People were not taking action the way I hoped that they would take action. But here's what changed. When I started focusing on third party, when I started focusing on tools, third party tools, not making myself the issue, I started using those tools to sell more product, to involve more, use the product myself, sell more product, recruit people, onboarding them effectively. I can say, let me tell you what I've done and how it worked for me. And they're, oh, okay, that makes sense. Maybe I'll do that too. And I was attending events, started cause more people to attend events. I engaged in personal development, caused more people to engage in personal development. Right? So yes, there's strategies to be able to create more duplication down the road, having systems, having tools, having campaigns, having all different kinds of things. But here's step one. You've got to make this circle work before these other circles are going to work. You have more influence on the duplication of your organization than you think, and it's more about your activity than you'd like it to be. You need to become that ambassador. You're going to need to become that lighthouse. You need to become that example that will let people realize, well, if they can do it, maybe I can do it. I'm seeing them do it. They're getting results. And if they get results, well, maybe I can too. Okay? So the first step in duplication is making this circle work. It's about you. There's other levels to duplication we'll talk about, of course, but this one is the first. Okay? So make your circle work, and then the rest gets much, much easier. That's our lesson today. For today. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.
Я злился, потому что люди не действовали так, как я надеялся. И что же изменилось? Я начал использовать сторонние инструменты, чтобы продавать, чтобы использовать продукт, привлекать людей, правильно их вводить в бизнес. Я мог сказать: вот что я делал, и это сработало для меня. Тогда они говорили: о, может быть, и мне тоже попробовать. Я стал посещать мероприятия, и мои люди стали чаще туда ходить. Я стал заниматься личностным ростом, и мои люди стали заниматься этим. Да, конечно, есть стратегии для дальнейшей дупликации, системы, инструменты, компании. Но первый шаг – это вы. Заставьте свой круг работать. И тогда другие начнут работать тоже. У вас больше влияния на дупликацию в вашей организации, чем вы думаете. И это больше зависит от ваших действий, чем вам, возможно, хотелось бы. И вы должны стать главным амбассадором, тем маяком, тем примером, который вдохновляет других подумать: если у него получается, может, и у меня получится. Они видят, что вы получаете результат, и начинают верить, что смогут тоже так же. Так что первый шаг дупликации – это заставить работать свой круг. Все начинается с вас. Конечно, есть и другие уровни дупликации, о них мы еще поговорим, но это первый и самый важный шаг. Итак, заставьте работать свой круг, и все остальное станет гораздо проще. Это наш урок на сегодня. Увидимся завтра. Берегите себя.
Zoya, thank you very much for your excellent translation. I believe if you have any questions, please ask or speak up. If not, we will see you next Monday. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Zoya. I'll see you next time. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Thank you, Alex.
Зоечка, спасибо.
Спасибо вам.